Hey, good evening. This is Sister Alexis Roberts coming to you live from Center of Hope and Hope Kids. Tonight's topic is called Communicating Hope to Kids. And so tonight we wanted to open up the floor and have a discussion with you about some current events and topics that have been happening here in our nation. We are so excited to introduce to you some faces that you may know and then some you may have never met before, but we're bringing them live to you tonight because we wanted to gather the experts and also parents who are also Christian to get their opinion, get their insight, and get some clear next steps for us as parents on the things that we can do to help better the communication about current issues in our social climate with our children. So first up, I'd like to introduce to some and to reacquaint with others, Sister Adrienne Dixon, who is first and foremost my friend. There she is over there in the corner. And she's also the wife to Jeremy Dixon and the mother of 4, foster mom of 5. And she is by trade an accountant. But she comes to us tonight to bring us just some expertise in the field of parenting. At the same time, she has this calm demeanor where she really, I feel, embodies that be anxious for nothing spirit. And so I just welcome her tonight, and we're so happy to have her here. Thank you so much, Sister Adrienne, for joining us.
Thanks, Alexis.
Next up, we have Brother Jonathan Jenkins, who is also a friend of mine. So happy to have him. He is a husband and a father of 2. Jace is one of my students. I really enjoy having him in Hope Kids as children's ministry director. And we actually had the opportunity of serving together in Hope Kids camp. And he is an educator. He currently teaches 10th grade English. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us tonight. And next up, we have Ms. Dietrich Baker, all the way from San Diego, but vicariously through Dallas, Texas tonight. She's joining us. And so we're so happy to have her. Dietrich is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has been doing so for 10 years. And so she is a busy mom too. She didn't tell you guys this early, but I'm going to tell it. She is a mom of 3, a wife, super busy. She homeschools. She does a lot of different stuff. She's super talented. But most importantly, she has a heart after Christ, and I just really appreciate that about her so much. So thank you, Ms. Dietrich, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, my friend, Miss Amy Pierce, who has been in the marketing and business world for 15 years. Prior to becoming a mom of 2, her son Luke and my son are besties at school. And she also has an older son, Trey. And she's a husband. I mean, she's married as well. I don't even know how long you've been married to Bobby.
Almost 20 years.
20 years.
A long time.
So, and she is currently a volunteer and community leader. And so we wanted to invite her into this conversation as well because she brings insight, and her heart is so in alignment with what we need during this season. And so I wanted to invite her out, and I'm so grateful that she joined us tonight. Thank you, Amy, for coming out.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, you guys, so I want to get started with our topic for tonight, and it's going to sound a little formal, but just bear with me. I think it'll make sense in just a short while. In this current social climate, the world and its dominant issues seem to have bubbled up and over, leaving us as parents in a position of quandary and unrest, which leads us to exploring the conversation of effective communication with our children. In these moments, we have to assume the power of narrating these teachable moments in a way that's both informative, provides safe scaffolding, and preserves the identity and innocence of our children. We realize that these conversations will differ across the spectrum of ages, but right now, it's our aim to break the silence as parents and to begin to communicate by bringing hope to these challenging times. This discussion will serve as the first of a series of conversations through experiential learning and actionable steps that, to create new culture around what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ and intentionally creating environments that produce equality and equity for all. Currently focusing on the African American experience in general faith communities, okay? But most importantly, our goal is to communicate to our kids the love of God, the grace of God, and hope for a better future that is found in God. Okay. So the reason why this even came up, separate from that formal introduction, was I, as a mom, as a teacher, and as a children's ministry director, felt very perplexed and overwhelmed in my own mind about the issues of George Floyd, the issues of Breonna Taylor, and others that we've seen time and time again, and how to communicate that effectively to our children. And so I want to open up this discussion by starting with a few questions. And I'm kind of going to go in order. So forgive me if you see me looking off to the side. It's just because I want to make sure that I do this in a timely fashion. So I'm going to keep time just to make sure that we stay on schedule. But that doesn't mean that I'm not involved in the conversation. But I feel like I'm not the only parent that feels that way. I'm not the only parent who has felt like, oh my gosh, this stuff is so heavy. How do we practically have these conversations with children and preserve their innocence while at the same time inform them of the world that they live in? And so I felt like this was a discussion that was worth having and that other families needed to know. And so what we did was we did a little survey to just check and make sure that we were accurate. And what we found is that I asked the question of, have you talked to your children about the current issues surrounding the death of George Floyd? And out of a survey of 24 parents responded back, which is about a quarter of our Sunday population. 55% of them said no, they had not told their children. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that their children don't know. It's just that they didn't talk to them about it. I said, do you find the topic of racism hard to discuss based on your children's age? And 65% of parents said yes. Would you be interested in engaging in a panel to talk about it? And 79% of the parents said yes. So that means that there's a desire. And so that was exciting for me. And then I just asked them, I gave them a group of topics and asked them to put them in order according to what they felt was most important. And that's what leads our discussion for tonight. So the 3 questions that we're answering are the top 3 topics that parents chose that they wanted to hear about first. So that leads us right into our first question. So I'm going to direct this at Adrienne, Jonathan, and I will chime in a little bit at the end. Okay. So how do you think, so the first topic is how to build a child's identity, both in the natural form and in the spiritual side. So in your opinion, or in your experience, what are some of the most effective ways to build and maintain a child's identity? And the second part of that is, are there things that you would avoid in the formative years? And either one of you can go first.
Okay. Well, I will jump right in there. To the first question, what things do I think, in my opinion, are critical to forming a child's identity? I mean, obviously, I think faith, as believers, that is the foundation. We were created in God's image. There is no mistake with any of us. So I think really, it's been something that we've done. It's something that we attempt to do through the church also, is really attempting to shape the children's identity by letting them know the purpose of their creation, that God created them intentionally, fearfully and wonderfully made, all of the things, all of the scriptures that validate who they are, that kind of let them to know that no matter what anybody else says about them, this is what God says about you. So I think that's, ultimately the foundation for any identity. And then I think also families. So within, each community, there are stories, there are traditions, there are, things that are passed down. And I think those things are also critically important for us to pass down to our children so that they know who they are, and they know their lineage, their ancestry, so that they can begin to kind of determine how that plays out and how that looks in their lives. And I think it's critical for us to give them a proper understanding of that. I think sometimes, we kind of leave it to whatever they're learning, whether it be in their school environment or wherever else. And we kind of leave it to everybody else to fill in those pieces. They're looking at media, they're reading literature, all from other people's perspectives of who they are. And we just kind of let that play out. And I think we need to take an active role in explaining to them who they are, whatever, the culture, they come from, their history, as African Americans, not starting with American history, but going further back than that. So I think those are two critical things that we definitely have to utilize in building, especially, from a young age, their identities.
That's good. That's really good. What do you think about the formative years? Like, when do you think that we should start? Like, how young?
So I'm just a believer in being really honest with my kids. Of course, you have to gauge it depending on their age, and how to appropriately explain certain things. But I just kind of feel like, as I just said, there's so much in our culture that is informing the way that they think about themselves, that we have to actively speak into that at early ages. And I think that the premise that kids are too young, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, because at young ages, they're seeing a lot now. They have access to everything on the internet. They have YouTube, they have TikTok, they have so many things that are feeding them who they are. And so I think for us, and particularly as believers, we do a disservice to them when we try to shield them from, what we are uncomfortable talking about as adults, and there's a way to do it, but I feel like, those conversations are necessary even at a young age, because they're going to experience things at a young age. Yeah. And if they're not informed about what those things kind of look like and the appropriate way to process that and knowing who they are, then I think it can really shape them in a way that tends to be more negative than positive.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I'd love to thank you, Sister Adrienne. But Jonathan, I'd love for you to speak to this too, also because you are the father of 2 young children right now. So, I think the oldest is in the kindergarten age range, right? Or preschool kindergarten. And so as an educator, as a dad, and the father of a young kid, like a younger child, what is your opinion on that? Do you feel like it's never too early, in addition to what, Sister Adrienne is saying, or?
As far as identity, I definitely believe it's never too early. What I found effective as far as like building my child's identity is, it starts with like being a small baby, like even before the child can talk. Like you are taking the kid out to the world, you're explaining different things to them. It could be something as small as like a grocery store. You're picking up a lemon, you're giving them the word. This is a lemon, this is yellow, this is smooth, and even comparing it to an apple. Exposure looks like trips. I think the main thing that I want to talk about is exposure. Like exposure looks like trips to the library, different parks throughout the city, road trips, flight travel as well. And just giving them like that perspective that there's more to the world than just them, and that they can see that, okay, there's other people, there are other animals, and those are things you have to take into consideration. So that like it kind of helps your child not have like a self-centered perspective. Like there's more than just LA, there's more than just California, and teaching the kid about the world around them. And then like representation is important as well. I found that Target has a great selection of like authors or books that are written by Black authors with Black characters in them, and they portray them in a positive light. And those have been very important to me, that I buy for my kids every time I see them, and I just read them to them like every day, so that they can see positive images of families and different Black people doing different things. Like there's so many career choices that we can take, but sometimes we just don't know. Yeah. And then as far as spiritually, or your spiritual identity, I believe first it starts with the parent. You have to model that. You have to show your kid that you are serious about it. You can't just say like, oh yeah, we believe in God, we're Christians, but your house doesn't look like it. So you have to kind of show that. You have to, your kid has to see you pray, has to see you take care of business like a Christian would. and go to church, and then you talk about these things outside of church too. It's just not a one-day experience. And yeah, I think representation and exposure.
I love that you said that. And I even love your example about representation and how you say, you find all these different books in Target. One of the things I absolutely love about that store is when you walk in, you see representation of all cultures in their marketing. Like you look at their billboards, you notice it's just like the Rainbow Coalition there. I think that even in those small little trips to the neighborhood community Target, you see that the world is bigger than you. And that those little moments of exposure start to help them develop their identity. What do you say to the argument, and anybody can chime in on this one, what do you guys say to the argument of teaching colorblindness so that kids are accepting of multiculturals? I guess that's the premise behind it.
I'll start with that one. I don't subscribe to the notion of teaching colorblindness because it's fine that there are people who look different from you and speak differently than you and listen to different music and may believe different things. There are many things that you can gain from people who see the world differently from you. And I think it would be more like advantageous to celebrate and highlight each other's differences and use them as learning experiences. And like, to me, it's more uniting when you can truly be yourself in your own skin and be loved for it. So like, in conclusion, I don't really think that it's good to teach colorblindness, but I think it's key to teach others to accept and love people from like different walks of life.
Yeah.
I agree. Oh,
No, go ahead.
I agree with Jonathan also. I think that the idea of teaching colorblindness, I think while and you understand what people say when they say that, but I think, first of all, there's no way to avoid color in our society. And I agree, there's so many things to be celebrated that we need to teach each other to properly understand and, have a desire to want to learn about other cultures. I think part of the issue that we're seeing right now is that there has kind of been this, I don't want to say nobody wants, but there has been this level of not wanting to acknowledge and, kind of just ignorance, so to speak, about kind of, race and things associated with race. And I think that has kind of led to maybe more damage than good, you know what I mean? And it can kind of lead to a naiveness, you know what I mean? And people being able to say, oh, well, I'm colorblind. Well, most of the world is not. So I think, identifying and knowing that, hey, we're different and that's okay. I celebrate you and I celebrate me too. And one doesn't have to negate the other, I think is probably a more healthy perspective because we're surrounded by so many people from so many places with so many different ideas about different things.
I agree. I think that the idea of colorblindness is brought or birthed out of a good place. Like people feel like they're really trying to teach love everyone, right? When they're teaching colorblindness. But children as young as age 2 and 3 are able to see and identify different colors. And I just remember when my children were younger, they'd say, Mommy, you're brown and grandmother's peach and sister is yellow. And I mean that everyone was a different color from the Crayola crown box. I mean, like that's what they saw as different. So they didn't necessarily know black and white, but they knew everybody's skin tone was different. And so even at that age, I was able to talk to them about loving and embracing differences. I mean, when you walk outside your door, you see the different colors of the world. I mean, God is such a creative God. And so even bringing their awareness of like, yes, like God is so creative. He's so just good and different. He loves different variety. And that is why he created so many of us so different, and even within our own family, mommy is brown and daddy is dark brown, like they were all on the shades. I mean, you would have thought they had gone through the crayon box and like picked the color for everyone, but that's okay. And being able to use it as a teaching lesson or a teachable moment and not necessarily like, no, don't see color,
I love that. I think, so I've heard 2 as early as 2, but do you think that it actually, because Jonathan even referenced that maybe it happens a bit earlier. Do you guys think that like as early as they can start to identify basic primary colors is when we should start to, some kind of way layer in those conversations?
Well, yeah, like Jonathan was saying, I think at an early age, I mean, as early before that, they are able to identify the colors, right? Red, blue, yellow. I mean, that happens early on. It's not until 2 or 3 that they determine that people are having these different skin tones. You know, it's not until then that they're identifying, like, mommy is caramel and daddy is brown. You know, like, that's when the whole differentiation of color in our skin tone, our pigment, that they're able to like identify those things. And that's when the conversation even can move from, yes, we all see, yes, there are different colors in the world, yes, there are different skin tones in the world. So it's just an evolution for me of the conversation.
It's so interesting. My recently, my youngest is 7, but recently there's also, she's started to learn that there is a value system equated to different shades. And so she, the conversation between like mommy being this caramel color and daddy being like more cheesecake and lighter with a little, tan on top. And she's like, well, am I going to turn to your color? And seeing value in that. And she's like, I want to be your color. And then she's like, well, I can't find my color in the crayon box. And, even those moments, all of that is a part of forming the identity, but also assessing a value and telling her that, hey, every color is equal. Every color is important. Every color, matters. Every hair texture, every hair color. And that's another thing that, they figure out the hair thing. And it's as if they start to sort themselves into categories. And it's a really interesting thing to watch, children as they're developing. And, she's in first going to 2nd grade now, but it is really, really interesting concept. So funny enough, that's our first question. We finished our first section. So our second topic is on translating current events into ethical lessons, which I thought you kind of already, hit on a little bit as we talked about taking these moments and making them teachable. I guess the first question, and this is going to be aimed toward more Dietrich, Amy, Jonathan, and I'll probably have, tag in at the end as well. And so our first question for this section is, what are some of the best ways to lead into delicate conversation of race and the heaviness of its consequences in our current world climate? So that's a heavy question. More specifically within the family and elementary age children. So what are some of the best ways to lead into those conversations? Just to jump right in.
You wanted to take it, Amy? Or you look like you're about to say something.
Do I? I was trying to unmute myself.
Go for it.
I'm apologizing in advance for my puppy that is gonna like just finish his treat and he's gonna like bark at us any minute, but just so you know, but he's really cute. So, I think, it's tough because when I was reading through these questions, it's like there's so much that, I've got an almost 16-year-old and 12-year-old, and I always say like progress, not perfection. I'm just trying to take like baby steps with a lot of this stuff. But I think, I want to acknowledge everything and be truthful and honest and not sugarcoat anything with them, because they're old enough now where they can see through that, I think. And so just acknowledging a lot of this stuff and just calling it as it is, because they're at the age where they're beyond elementary. And so I'm not worried about making things totally age appropriate really and sugarcoating it because they're old enough. But I like the idea of, bringing it like closer to home. Like, okay, what if the person we're watching on TV was your father or your mother or your sister or your grandfather? Like, how would that make you feel? Just so that they really have some empathy around it. So it's not just someone on TV, I just think that sometimes they watch these things and they say, oh, that's not going to happen to me, or that's far from home or whatever. So that's kind of been my goal recently, is just being like, this is real. This is your world. You are going to need to get out there and make a difference and, show the world love, grace, empathy, all these things that, I want you to be. And so just really framing it through these lenses that they can relate to. is kind of what I'm trying to do today.
That's good.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's
good.
a positive start. It's definitely, Dietrich, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, I was gonna say that's great. And I think also another thing that I've been just working with some of the parents that I work with on teaching compassion. I mean, you can teach compassion at a young age. And a lot of times compassion births so much more positive into our world than we realize. There's just power in being compassionate, and understanding other people's experiences, and even at a young age, my youngest is getting ready to be 2 in July. I should know this, right? My youngest is getting ready to be 2 in July, and my oldest is turning 9 Thursday. And even with them, having to talk with them about everything that's going on. My son, as him turning 9, is in a different place and a different understanding from my daughter, who is turning 7. She's 6. And so for us, what it's really looked like is being able to sit with them and seeing where they're at. What do you guys know about what's going on? Because we don't watch a lot of TV in our house. They don't really have access to social media or any kind of iPad or anything like that. But we live with my parents, and my parents watch the news all the time. And so even realizing that we are not their only teachers. They're not only learning from us, but they're learning from other people. They're watching the other things. And so even knowing that, okay, we realize that you've sat down with grandma and grandpa and watched the news or heard the news, even if you weren't looking at the TV, you were listening. And so sitting down with them and asking them, what did you hear? What did you see? What do you think about that? And that's how we kind of gauge our conversations. My daughter, she's like, I don't know. I have no idea what's going on. My son was like, the conversation was a lot different. The police have killed another Black man. And so those are two separate conversations. And so, us being able to divide and having a conversation with my son on a different level than we had with my daughter. The baby, even though she's able to see and identify colors, that conversation is not necessarily about race and what that looks like, but even having her brother and sister model compassion for her on different levels. I mean, my daughter just fell out the chair before I came to do this talk. And my daughter came over and she's like, are you okay? And my husband and I, we're rushing over, are you okay? And my son says, that's what happens when you reach for something and climb up on the chair. That's what you get for doing the wrong thing, kind of thing. And we had to stop and talk to him about being compassionate. Like, that's not the time to tell her that she's wrong for what she did and that's why that happened. Like, you need to see if she's okay, So even teaching compassion and modeling that for her, you can do things to meet your kids meet them on the level that they're at, without necessarily feeling like you're taking away their innocence. And I hear that a lot of parents are saying, like, I don't want to take away my child's innocence. Well, the truth is that they're being exposed to things, whether it be at school, on the TV, with their grandparents, with wherever they are, with friends. And so it's really making sure that you check in with them. We use family meetings a lot for our conversations. We have family meetings. We've actually, during this time, our family meetings have seemed to be almost every night. My son is like, can we have a family meeting? And I'm like, okay. We didn't used to have them that frequently, but I mean, he constantly has questions and he constantly wants to talk about things that are going on. And so, I think it's just meeting them where they're at by exploring. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? And what does it mean to them?
That's excellent. That's excellent. I think it kind of goes into using their 5 senses to build, teachable moments almost. And with that same thought in mind, how do you then model like what healthy race relationships look like? How do you show them with, in contradiction to what they might experience on TV or social media? How do you go so far as to whether curate intentionally or just naturally is just kind of how you live? What do you do to model healthy race relationships in your home, your personal life?
Well, oh, did you want to say, Amy? You want
No,
to?
you go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead. You go first.
I mean, for us, we go to like a multi-ethnic, multicultural church. It's very diverse. Our neighborhood is multi-ethnic. And so for some reason, like just recently, with everything that's been going on, my son, one of his best friends, she's white and she lives across the street, and he has been like, I want to go play with Anna. I want to go talk with Anna. And he's just been really like big on like hanging out with Anna and making sure that, because his thing was when we talked about it, he's like, I thought Martin Luther King fixed all this. I thought that this was all fixed after Martin Luther King. Like I can go across the street and hang out with Anna and it's okay. And so he's been kind of clinging to that, like, what is going on? Why? I thought this was done. Like, I thought we were done with this, And so for us, it's making sure that we model the fact that there are differences and within our own neighborhood, but that we talk to our neighbors. My parents laugh at me. They're like, you guys know everybody in the neighborhood. But we talk to everyone, because the Bible says to love all, right? And so that means that you go outside and you make an intentional effort to get to know people that don't look like you, people that don't do the same things that you do. Our other neighbors are from Uganda. I mean, our neighborhood is just very diverse. And so we talk to a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, and even being intentional about inviting them over to our house, not just meeting them outside, but also who we have coming over, inviting and cultivating those relationships with other people as well. That's so important for us. So we also, one of my son's closest friends at school, he doesn't necessarily live around us, but it's one of his close friends. And so cultivating that relationship and helping him have play dates with people that don't look like him is something that we also make sure that we're pretty intentional about doing, so that they are exposed to not just our family and people that look like us and do things the same way that we do them. I mean, we have a close friend of ours, and they are Trump supporters and they are Republican voters. And my son knows that. And because he followed, for some reason, he's gotten into politics. I don't even know why. But that's why, I don't know. But he's so big into politics. He listens, he pays attention. It's on the news, right? And so even him knowing that and us being able to have a conversation with people who are both Democrat, people who vote Republican, like, it's okay that everybody is different. We don't all need to think alike. It's great that we all think differently. And so even being able to have those conversations, like I said, my daughter's not so much into all that. She doesn't really care, but encouraging my son in what he's interested in and trying to support him in the conversations that he's interested in having.
I love that. I love creating intentional moments. Amy, I know you had a thought. I don't want you to forget your thought.
No, it was. I'm so glad, Dietrich, that you just went. That you went first. That was good. I mean, I wrote down to answer. Oh, George, sit down. That definitely modeling. Modeling is the name of the game. But this is for sure an area that I can do better. There has to be a lot of intention for me around this. Okay. And because just of where we live, because unlike you, Dietrich, we don't live in an area, that is incredibly diverse. And so I have to be intentional. But what I can do that's immediate and easy is just be nice to people and care. And just, and sometimes that you have to go out of your way, and that sometimes that's not the easy thing or the most outward thing. But, just sadly, people just don't care these days and just don't make an effort to care and to love and to lead with love and with grace.
Amy, can I interrupt you for just 1 second? Because I want to make mention of your intentionality. Like, when all of this went down, Amy was one of the first people who reached out to me and said, Alexis, oh my gosh, what can I do? I am so open. I'm willing. I know I got to do better. Help you know. And then for me, I told her how valuable that was to me. Like, I have tons of friends who are all over, crazy rainbow coalition of friends. And I can only name 2 people who actually reached out to me and said, hey, listen, I know that I have been quiet in ways that has been, you know, complacent at times. And I've never meant to do that. I am so sorry. I have a better understanding now. What can I do? How can I grow? And that intentionality piece is one of the first major steps. I feel like coming alongside, let's do life together, you know? There's already a common thread. Our kids go to school together. It was already that. So when she said that, I feel like we had some really real conversations that got really deep very quickly, but she was open and willing, and I was open and willing. And I think that's where it starts. And our kids see us doing that. And so, you know, there won't be an issue for them growing up, because this is just what we've always done. We've done life together.
Yep.
You know?
And I mean, already I've learned so much. I mean, just the colorblindness thing. Like, of course, I grew up thinking that's the way we treat people. We strive to be colorblind. But now I know, okay, wait a minute. Then we exclude all the learning we do from how cool people's traditions and cultures and backgrounds are. So, like, okay, let's move on with that now. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't just kind of been a little more open to this, right?
I think too, sorry, Alexis, I don't know if we're out of time. Oh.
No, actually, I'm gonna interject you right there. Write your thought down, because I might see my timer. Thank you. Oh. The last question I had was, for this particular section, was, and you kind of talked about this a little bit, Dietrich. What have your children been saying in response to the news or social media? And what topics have you had to redirect them, like redirect their thinking on? So sometimes you'll hear your kids sitting in front of the TV, like Rachel said, I'm so tired of these people burning stuff down. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Let's come back. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the reasons why. And then, and let me explain. I see, there's the timer. I thought I could stop it, but see, clearly I don't know how to work my phone. But let's talk about your understanding of that, and let me help guide your understanding of that. So I guess I'm asking that question of you guys as parents. What have your children seen, and where have you had to redirect their thinking, positive or negative, toward a more accurate understanding?
I will say that God is so good. So to start all this out, yes, social media influences, yes, TV, yes, friends, yes, they get all that influence. But before all this started, we were reading the book of Esther. And as we were reading the book of Esther, my son was like, you know, because Mordecai wanted to Haman wanted to destroy the Jews. And my son was like, well, isn't that kind of like racism? I mean, and him bringing that up, and like, I mean, it was total like God, right? That this is the connection that he's making. And so even being able to talk to them, like, this is not new to God. None of this is new to him. Everything that's happening, God is bigger, God is greater, and he saw them through. Even in Esther's time, he will see us through, you know? And so even beyond the media, I think one of the things that we have to focus on too, as parents who are Christian, is not allowing media and other sources outside to influence and be the main source of influence over our children's lives. And as much media as they're watching, as much word they need to be in as well. Come
on, word.
But, you know, and so I think even that being, like I said, it's not me at all, but God even leading us in our home to study the book of Esther. I mean, because we were so interested in helping our kids not just know the main stories in the Bible, but actually getting in and diving into some of the other characters in the Bible and just learning more beyond. I mean, it really was God that he led us to that. But even that, we've continued to get into the word and seek God as much as we're seeing the media, as much as we're seeing everything else. that has been a huge source of just hope, I think, in our home.
Thank you. That's awesome. I think that's the way he does it. That's the way the Holy Spirit moves. Adrienne, you have a comment you want to make about that as well, and how you've had to redirect.
Yeah. So for me, our children, the age ranges, we have 3 in high school, so they're a little older, but we have 1 that's in elementary. And, of course, they've all processed everything that they've been seeing in completely different ways. But for the youngest in particularly, she's not on social media. She's not, so we don't typically watch a lot of news. We have been lately. But so between that, I was starting to notice, her being a little more anxious, but then also overhearing some conversations in her classroom and the way that the events were being described and kind of explained to the kids, which weren't exactly accurate. And we go to, a school that there aren't many brown kids in our school. And so I had to listen in and say, hey, this is not completely what's going on. And I need to explain to you kind of the difference, because it was kind of being described as just, these people are out there and they're just tearing up stuff. And, the cause is not even relevant. You know what I mean? So things like that where I'm like, I have a daughter who, we've experienced things in our family personally related to this issue. And so I need for her to have a really clear understanding of what this is all about, not necessarily how it's manifesting for people, but what the issue is all about. And so having to kind of walk her through, not all of the history, but some of the history and kind of the layer upon layer and the long-standing effects of a lot of different things, not just this one instance. And I think, so in addition to, monitoring the social media and all of that, I think we also have to be aware of what's being said in other settings to our kids and how things are being explained and portrayed, and making sure that we're kind of, just checking in with them to see kind of, like you said earlier, how they understand what's going on, and how that's being formed by other influences. So we've kind of had to redirect in that way also, even from an educational standpoint of how that's been explained to her.
I think that's a perfect segue into growing forward. One of the taglines for Hope Kids is "Come grow with us." And that's not just on the things that are spiritual, but those are on the natural things too. Come grow with us and just let's do life together, but taking them from the age of 2 when they're freshly potty trained to the time where they're 11, they literally grow with us. Like her daughter, the one that she was just describing, who she just graduated from Hope Kids, and she's leaving us, and she's so excited to go to middle school. But I literally remember starting children's ministry when I started coming around maybe 6 years ago. So she was like in kinder, she was little. And then I came on board about 3 or 4 years ago, and I literally have grown with this child. So growing forward, what language, I want us to think about what language can we give? This is the practical stuff. Like what language can we start to think about and give our children to empower them and to help better prepare them? So that's this last segment. So I'm going to start my timer just to make sure that we stay on time. Timer, phone died. Got to do it the old way. Here we go.
I was going to ask Sister Adrienne, so your daughter's in school already?
Yes. So when they're out now for the summer.
Oh, they're out.
They were still in school. So they were doing their Zoom meetings every morning from like 9 to 12.
Okay.
And when all of the events started unfolding, I'm very, very aware of my kids. I'm very involved. Mm-hmm. And so I had said to her, hey, let me know if you guys start talking about this in class, just call me, you know what I mean? Because I'm right downstairs. And so she's like, hey, Mom, we're talking about it. And so I just sat on the steps and I just listened, you know what I mean? And I was, intrigued by, what was said, and subsequently followed that up with an email to her teacher as well as to the principal, and had subsequent conversations about that. But I think sometimes we even miss the fact that, there's information being given in classrooms or not being given that I think we really have to champion for our kids. because when school is in session, they're at school most of the day. You know, they're having their interaction with their teachers and administrators most of the day. You know, they'll come home for a couple hours and then they're going to bed. So, you know, we really have to know and be asking appropriate questions about what's being said, what's being taught, so that we can help to inform and shape their identity in a positive and a healthy way, where they're not walking away feeling like, you know,
and also
something that's not, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's unfortunate at times that we also have to think about the education that we're providing for our children. We also have to provide for the professionals who are providing the education for our children, because sometimes they don't always see it. I told Amy, I've had to have some really hard conversations with people about how one child is playing and it's aggressive, and another child is playing and he's just, he's a sporty kid. And depending on the color of the kid, like, it depends on which label you get. And I was like, well, we can't have that, I was like, well, let's look at this. And so explaining implicit bias and how you talk to me in the carpool lane as I'm picking up my child, and then you send a fiery email and you CC everyone on the school board. How is that an equitable response for something that could have been said through the car window when he was jumping in? You know what I'm saying? You just complimented me on my hair, but you didn't take the time to say, oh, Johnny had a rough day today. Like, it's simple. I think those are the moments where you find yourself, education is happening at multiple levels. Not that we owe it, but I think in this climate, this is a learning season, and we have to, take advantage of it. So growing forward, language for growing forward. As teachers, community leaders, parents, and professionals, how can we best equip our children to navigate uncomfortable spaces where they may be mistreated, misunderstood, or overlooked because of their race? How can we give them language growing forward?
I think a strong combatant for that is really knowing yourself, because you can't really control what's going to happen outside when you're out in the world. But like, when you know your rich history and like the power that your people possess, and like when you know that like all life came from Africa, and like like the splendor of like Mansa Musa and like the power of like the Egyptian people, you know that you have like a deeper like root in where your people come from. I believe your skin gets a little bit thicker and you're able to kind of withstand and understand, like, okay, my people have been viewed this way for X amount of years. However, that's not the case.
That's good. That's good.
I agree with that. I think there's a lot that even we don't know. I know even as things have unfolded for me and I've been just reading a lot, there were things that I was like, I never heard this before. I never heard about the Children's March. You know what I mean? Like, that there were kids who, like, were thrown in jail, and some of them were as young as 9 years old. Like, I never knew, that there were so many things in our history of just ways to even participate and ways to vocalize what you're feeling, even at a young age, that I've been kind of learning about just in my own reading. So I think that's really huge. And there's a lot of layers to it, I know, especially in this country. So it really is important, I think, that we begin to have those dialogues with our kids about where they come from, the history, like for real history. But also, I think, number one, giving them time to process what they're feeling. So, and that comes, everybody's on a different timeline for that. So I don't usually push my kids. Like, when something happens, I don't usually push right into, what are you feeling about this? I kind of just let them show me or kind of gauge where they are. I can usually tell, I know their demeanors. I know when they're kind of, introspective. I can see, so I kind of let that be a gauge. And sometimes I'll usually just kind of like talk to them individually before, like, maybe we talk as a group, just to give them an opportunity to process, to feel what they're feeling, and then to try to help them put language around it if they can't. You know what I mean? But I think that's really important too, because sometimes, we can kind of leap to wanting to offer solutions for our kids. And I think it's important that they be able to process and put words to it and really hone in on, what am I feeling about this? And why do I feel that way? what kind of effect is this having on me? You know what I mean? And so I think, and for adults too, you know, before we start reacting, I think just kind of allowing it to marinate for a bit and see if they can even put language to what it is that they, you know, are feeling, and, you know, how we can start navigating from there to help try to push them towards, you know, being able to vocalize what they're feeling, even in situations with a teacher or with a coach or with a friend. You know, we've had so many different scenarios come up from this, you know, and they've had to navigate all of that. So, you know, so those things, I think, kind of just letting them try to figure it out for a minute, you know, before delving into trying to offer solutions or, you know, give advice.
Yeah. I think I wanted to share a quick story. The common term that I hear is, that's not fair. That's unfair. So, classic case, my son and Amy's son are in Spanish class, and the teacher has an issue with something that my son was doing, but they both were together doing whatever they were doing. And Daniel says, that's not fair. He didn't get in trouble, right? And so then later, the two of them have a conversation where they have created amongst themselves strategy for how are we going to deal when the teacher is unfair? What are we going to do when the teacher is unfair? And it's kind of like, we're going to go tell on the teacher because she was unfair because we both were doing it, but she only pinpointed one. So that was one of the like very basic ways in which they had together. It almost kind of reminded me of like an anti-bully strategy. You know, not that it's the same, but it's, you know, from their perspective, because, you know, we teach our children to respect adults, and we teach them not to talk back, and we teach them to, whatever's going on with the adult, you tell mommy and daddy, and then mommy and daddy will, you know, deal with the adults. But then now they're getting to the age where these are young men in training, and they're not taking it. They're not, you know, so they've come together and created their own little strategies. Like, this is not fair. And when we see things that are not fair, and in this particular environment, they're, you know, encouraged to speak out and be vocal. So, which I appreciate, because they need practice in how to advocate for themselves. Whether it's a grade, and you need to advocate for yourself in writing with your email system and practice what that skill is, and then CC your parents to let your teacher know that their mom and dad are on board with what's going on and that we've talked about it. Whether it's that layer of advocacy, or whether it's find you and your compadres and y'all advocate for whatever the issue might be at the time. So I think one word is figuring out if it's a fair situation or if it's unfair. And then what do you do? And what is your plan of action when you find yourself in either of those situations? And this, you know, that leads into like, what do they do if they're in a group of friends and a friend says something that's inappropriate or disrespectful to another person simply because of their race? Now, because they've experienced it in class, now they can probably go into that next thing. Anybody have any other words that pop up in your mind that they can kind of use to help them navigate those spaces?
I think it depends on the age, but like with my daughter, for her, it's like everything is like, well, that they're not being nice.
Because she's 7, right?
She's 6. She'll be 7 at the end of the year. But so her thing is like, why can't everybody be nice or kind? Why aren't people being kind to each other? And so even with her, just being able to identify like, okay, if you see another child on the playground and other people are not being kind to them, what can you do? And even for her, because she's so shy, her way of advocating and stepping in, it looks totally different from my son's, because he's more outgoing and he's more the kid like, okay, somebody's not being kind or somebody's being unfair, I'll say something. She's very quiet and reserved. And so for her, that's not her way of doing that. So we've even had to talk with her and ask her, like, what is the way that you feel like you can step in and help when you see somebody that's not being kind? And she's more of the type that needs to go tell an adult, or, you know, and so that's her way of showing support or concern for someone else or compassion for someone else. And so even realizing that not all kids are going to be able to step up to the other child or say something, but just like Miss Adrienne was saying, Sister Adrienne was saying, like, she told her daughter, like, if they start talking about this, come and let me know. So even for that child who might, like my daughter, she's very shy. And so even giving her that and saying, hey, if you start hearing stuff like this, come and let me know. That is even, supportive and helpful, I think, for young kids. And then some older kids who don't necessarily speak out in a different kind of way. So just realizing too that all kids are different. And so the way that they are going to stand in the gap for other people is going to look different.
I love that, stand in the gap. Back in the day, there was this old song my mother used to play, this lady called Babby Mason, Standing in the Gap. It was a song, right? Standing in the gap for someone else. And I think that's where we are. So it's interesting because adults, we are trying to do that for one another. And so trying to then translate that for children is the sticky part. So I guess it brings me to my last question, which is this is this adult issue, is this more of an adult issue than a child concern in terms of the language, right? Or is this that, adults need to first have the language to be able to help their children know how to do better and then influence their thinking? Is it that we need to get it right first and then we can, help them by influencing them, teaching them, helping them to stand in the gap because we first have done it first? What do you guys think? And this is for everybody.
So that's difficult because we've been trying to get it right for a long time as adults and we haven't, right? So what does that look like? What is the getting right? You know what I mean? Like, what is that? It's kind of, it's kind of difficult to kind of pinpoint what that is. But I do think, as believers, if we point them back to the word, so I know that there are some things that are difficult for us to talk about. Some things are very complicated. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of everything. But when you look at the Bible and you look at, Old Testament, the way that God dealt with stuff, New Testament, the way that Jesus dealt with stuff, I think we can bridge kind of what that conversation is, right? Because even, when you look at the Old Testament, like, God doesn't play, right? God the Father does not play. He would smite everything and wipe out cows and kids and everything. He does not have a tolerance. He doesn't have a tolerance for certain things. There's only a certain threshold, and he'll tell you, I'm gonna wipe you out. I'm gonna bring you back, but I am gonna do this right now, right?
I love that.
And then you look at Jesus, and Jesus comes, and Jesus didn't play either, but it was a little different. Jesus, you see that compassion, you see the engagement with people, really walking people through. And so I think showing them that, yes, there is a journey. We're all on a journey. We all are trying to figure it out. But, there are consequences, and there is a right and a wrong. There is a standard, and we see that, God sets a standard with what, is sin and what is not sin, how we should treat people. Like, it's clear in the word. And I think if we use that to kind of help navigate that right, wrong versus just what we think, I think it can kind of give more context, because depending on how we feel as people on any given day, we may say something off the cuff or, whatever. But I think pointing them back to kind of, well, what do we see in the word? Like, let's look at this story. Let's look at, how God dealt with this. Let's look at what Jesus said about that, and so trying to help them use that as their gauge and as their kind of, when they're looking out into the world and they're seeing injustice or they're seeing these things, like filtering that through how did I see that in my Bible play out? It was a different scenario. It was a different group of people, but it's the same issue, so how do we see those things taking place, and how do we see the response, of God, and, how do we see those teachings, from Jesus? Like, how do we see that playing out and kind of helping to filter that right, wrong through the word, you know what I mean? And helping them to make those connections.
That's awesome. I think that ties us up really well toward the end, because we started with how can we help to strengthen their identity both naturally and spiritually, and that's where we ended up. It's all based on the word, because it is the umbrella under which we live all areas of our lives. And God the Father and Jesus the Son is the best example and the model that we can use from the Christian perspective to be able to encourage our children, to point them toward right, and help them to see the difference between right, almost right, and wrong. And having them to understand that it's in doing it the way that he did it that causes us to be obedient and to see the power of God work on our behalf in our lives, and to change those things that maybe we have been trying to change in our own power, but have yet to see the dividends. It hasn't worked. And so I think it's going to take the power of God in our lives in this scenario, in this season, for us as adults to get it right finally, and then also to be able to teach the next generation equally the same. Tap into the power of God, and he can handle any problem that we face. And so that concludes our time together tonight. This was an awesome opportunity. I am so grateful without tearing up. So very grateful for your time, for your energy, for your thought around this subject, for your willingness to be transparent and open, and to be brave and stand out on the front line and do something that maybe you've never done before, because none of this is a place where we've been. This is all uncharted territory. And so we are trailblazers. And so congratulations, you just made it through your first life course. But thank you so much. And to our Hope KidZ family and friends, we hope that this has been beneficial for you. Stay tuned. We will have session 2 coming out soon. And so I am just really, really grateful. Thank you to Sister Adrienne again, Amy Pierce, Dietrich Baker, and Jonathan Jenkins. We appreciate you so much.